The most recent episode of Agatha All Along, Death's Hand in Mind, is incredible in my opinion. It's being praised as one of the best shows in the series, maybe one of the best Marvel Disney Plus shows out there, and I would tend to agree with that. From the writing to the costuming to the performances and the sets, it was just all around an exceptional piece of television. Right now, it is sitting at a 9.2 rating on IMDb, which is fantastic. I compared this last episode in my own mind to two episodes of television that I think are incredible. The Constant from Lost and The Door from Game of Thrones. All three episodes share a similar sort of theme of having a character with their mind being unstuck in time and warping back and forth between past, present, and future. But whereas those two other episodes, The Constant and The Door, in my opinion, were exceptional, like almost perfect episodes of television, Agatha All Along didn't quite hit that level of the other two. And I want to explain why that is and how it can help your writing in the future. Because had Agatha All Along done a few of these little things, just made a few little tweaks, I think it would have been in the conversation of one of the best episodes of television to come out this year. And a big reason why I'm saying Agatha All Along isn't quite as good is because of the emotional climax of all three episodes. And spoilers coming for last night's Agatha specifically, but also for The Constant and The Door, Game of Thrones, and Lost. If you haven't seen those shows and you don't want to be spoiled, this is your warning. Same for Agatha All Along. We're going to be spoiling everything in the season up to this point. Episode 7, I believe, is what came out last night. But for all three of those episodes, there was an emotional climax to the episodes. Last night with Lilia Calderu sacrificing herself to kill the Salem 7 and save her coven. In The Constant, it was Desmond reuniting with Penny, and then Faraday seeing in his notes, if something goes wrong, Desmond is my constant. And for The Door, obviously the famous hold the door, ho door. I want to point something out because I'm going to be a little bit critical of Agatha All Along, but I think Agatha All Along actually did some things that are more impressive than what either The Constant or The Door did with this unstuck in time concept. The first one being that they did something very tricky and cool that they nailed, which is that they weaved the moments of Lilia being unstuck in time throughout the season and then called them back in this episode. That was something that was really impressive, seeing like those moments where Lilia is being quirky and kooky, kind of coming back and paying off in this episode, and seeing how, how the way she experiences time makes those make sense now. Another thing I think they did masterfully is using the tarot cards in this episode, how it relates to Lilia herself, how it is used to reflect the journey that she went through throughout this season and this episode specifically, and also how the coven fits together in her mind. Another incredible thing that they did was how they used the tarot cards visually, having those like visual clues planted throughout the season of the show. It makes it really interesting on rewatch, and again, goes to show like the planning that Jack Schaefer, the creator, writer, director of this episode, went through in terms of how they set up everything and how they, execute and knock down those pins in the end. That was very, very impressive. And then finally, in this episode, Lilia really got her chance to shine. They did this with Alice as well, giving them like an emotional arc over the story that culminated in, Alice dying and Lilia sacrificing herself. But it was very good to see them use, all these tools to set up and give Lilia an emotional final arc. And that was really impressive to do for not just one minor character, but two in this entire season. However, and this is where I'm going to be critical of Agatha All Along, in my opinion, the execution of this entire concept of the witch being unstuck in time just didn't quite fully work out to its best of abilities. It was very good, I will say, but I think there are ways it could have been executed better, and there are ways that I think Lost and Game of Thrones both did that better. I want to talk a little bit about the difference between concept and execution. This is the way that I think about writing when I'm doing writing for myself. Concept is the big overarching things like themes, story beats, plot points, the structure of the story, all the things that I think Agatha All Along did very, very well, like how they set up different plot points and came back to them later on in this episode. Things that they did in earlier episodes that came back in this episode's foreshadowing, the themes around the tarot cards, things like that. But then there's also execution, which is more of the minutia, the dialogue, the interactions between the characters, the character depth, the character building, things like that, the mechanics of how you execute the story structure. That's why I call it execution versus concept. In that area, I think Agatha All Along is lacking just a little bit compared to the other two episodes I mentioned. And there's two main reasons that I think Agatha All Along's execution was just a little bit lacking. And the first one is stakes. Now, a lot of people say that Marvel shows don't have stakes, they're very low stakes, or their stakes are grandiose, like Moon Knight having the big kaiju battle at the end. For this episode specifically, the stakes were pretty reasonably set. Like with the other episodes, you're in a trial where there's the possibility that you or the Coven will die. And if you compare them to the stakes of the other two episodes, The Constant and The Door, very similar. In The Constant, Desmond is going to die if he doesn't find his constant, which is Penny. In The Door, the White Walkers are coming for Bran, Hodor, Mira, the Three-Eyed Raven, and all of the children to kill them. However, the difference is that in Agatha All Along, the stakes, in my opinion, are not particularly meaningful. And by that I mean, we don't fully understand how this trial in particular relates to Lilia until the very end. In the other trials, specifically with Alice and Jennifer in their trials, we understand why they're being tested and how these tests relate to things that they have had to overcome. For Lilia, that's not really the case. We've never seen her be particularly unable or afraid to use her divination with regards to tarot cards. She did the reading for William in the previous episode. Also, the eventual reveal is that she is the person who has to do the tarot reading for herself. But it's not as though we have a sense throughout the show that she is particularly lost in terms of her own self-identity. In terms of her mind, she is a little bit out there, but the idea that she has to go through this tarot reading to discover something about herself, in my mind, it wasn't particularly well set up. And then finally, the risk of death. Yes, there's the risk of death for the trial, but the big reveal, the big punch at the end, the sacrifice that Lilia makes isn't with regards to the trials, but with regards to the Salem 7. And in my opinion, they haven't been set up sufficiently at all throughout the course of the entire show to be a real menace. They haven't killed anybody. They fought the Coven once, and the person who fought them got their ass kicked. All they've really done is just be scary, and then this episode they've died. So there's not a whole lot of stakes and tension when Lilia, sacrifices herself to defeat the Salem 7. They don't seem like a very foreboding force. And that kind of goes to the second reason that I think the execution in this episode kind of failed. And that is the emotional attachment we have to the characters. When you look back on The Constant, and The Door, you can see that not only are the stakes high, but our emotional attachment to those stakes is also particularly high. In The Constant, we've already seen Desmond and Penny's relationship. We've seen how much Desmond means to the rest of those Losties. We've seen, they haven't interacted this entire time. This incredible love story between these two, and them finally getting to interact has an emotional meaning to us. And similarly for Game of Thrones, we've seen Bran and Hodor be together. We know Hodor's not the most emotive character, but he takes care of Bran, and Bran seems to have a little bit of love for Hodor. And so that reveal at the end that Bran ultimately is the reason that Hodor is the way he is, and Hodor knows for his entire life that he's gonna have to sacrifice himself for Bran. It's an emotional gut punch because we know how these two characters have interacted together, and we've seen them for so long. With Lilia specifically, we have not, before the episode, gotten a lot of time to understand her past, her haunting, her scar, whatever you want to call it, that compelled her to go to the road. Even in this episode, she asks, "Why did you come on the road?" And she says, "For power," which is what we were presented with as being the reason she came on the Witch's Road to begin with, that she said she wanted her power back. Her master, her teacher said, you don't need power, your power is not gone, so why are you here? That's a really good question that we don't fully get an answer to in this episode. And to be fair, Agatha All Along did some of that in this episode with the interactions between Jen and Lilia. They built up a little bit of that camaraderie between the two. So it was nice to have a little bit of that interaction between them, right before she died, when she said, you were the road forward. But the problem is we just didn't have enough time to sit in these relationships. Lilia and Teen / Wiccan / Billy Maximoff, they didn't really have an emotional connection. Lilia and Agatha, their emotional connection wasn't really there either. But it's odd because you compare it to what they did with Alice, having her have those little moments with Teen / Billy in the episodes before she died, and her overcoming her emotional trial, about the trauma, from her mother's passing, and her overcoming that and then dying the next episode hits a lot harder because we understand emotionally, the journey Alice went through, and emotionally what she means to the other members of the Coven. For Lilia, we didn't really get that until this very episode, and so we didn't have enough time to really sit in it and appreciate it. And it also just kind of takes away from the punch a little bit because, in the same episode that, she does the big reveal about her past, she dies. It's kind of like that old cliche where, a character, in a war movie, when he talks about his wife or his girl back home, he's gonna die. I think to make this hit a lot harder and make it more emotional, and this is a great tip for your own writing, you should be establishing the stakes much earlier, number one, with regards to like the opponent that they're going to be facing and the trials and what this trial means to them. Developing a lot more of that characterization earlier for Lilia would have done that. And then number two, make it a little bit less obvious that, this character who's doing a lot of exposition around, their backstory and, their trauma and is going through this arc is about to sacrifice themselves and die. Because when you do that, when you hold that punch a little bit longer, you take the reader or the viewer out of the mindset of, oh, this person's going to die. They start thinking they're going to be safe because they passed their trial, they went through their arc, and then when they die, it hits a lot harder. So that's my take on Agatha All Along. Really good episode. I really like it, but it just the little thing is what kept it from being an all-time great episode. But let me know what you think in the comments. And if you like videos like this, please give it a like and a subscribe to this channel. I'm going to be doing a lot more like literary and film breakdowns as far as just like focused on the writing. So let me know if there's anything you want me to break down next, and I'll talk to you soon.